As always, I don't know if you've seen any of their episodes, but we like starting with this really weird exercise we call Cape You. So it's one thing about your younger self, one thing about your culture, or something unique about you. You can share one story about any of these or all three. I will go ahead and kick us off. Something that's top of mind for me is weddings. I was actually just at one of my best friends' weddings. He just got married this last week, which was a lot of fun. It was a privilege to be at. But that's something that I really enjoy, is kind of the celebration of marriage and the union of two people. It was just nice to be able there. And I was lucky enough to serve in the role of a best man. And I just thought, the things around that of sharing and answering questions, of just the fear that comes with like making that next step and being really vulnerable, I really, really liked. And it was something that, I really value about our culture, and I think is fantastic. And with that said, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, I love weddings too. So congratulations on that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about my culture, because that gave me pause for a long time. I really didn't know what my culture was.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with, people who are Italian, Korean, German, and they would eat special foods and they would talk about the country. And all I'd ever heard of was some vague Eastern European place where our people came from. And what I found was my identity was much more, I was raised as being as a Jew, but not a religious person. More, I like to describe myself as a bagel and lox Jew. So there's a lot of room in Judaism for kind of that secular cultural belonging. And it took me a while to identify that, okay, I may not relate to a place in the world, but I relate to a community and a people, and that in the traditions and the food and the bagel and lox and the music of the Jewish people. So it took me a while to get there, but that's how I identify.
Rachel, I love that story. I think I resonate with what you just shared a lot. Being someone who's mixed, who's black and white, I think I had a lot of that too, where I didn't feel black enough for the black folks, didn't feel white enough for the white folks, and really recently have stepped much into like, it is what it is to me, and I get to be a part of this larger community, which is fantastic, but I don't have to conform to that community in order to feel like it lessens, for me, my blackness, which I love you sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Well, and I think it's not that unique for Jewish people, because I think of a lot of us don't necessarily identify with a part of the world simply because of the adversity and the struggles that we experienced in different parts of the world. So it's more about the community as opposed to the country or the nationality.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Such a good point. So I want to jump in to a really great question for you, which is you recently did a post. This will be going out far past when that post went out, but it seems like it's something everyone is really, really curious about. Talk about age discrimination for our viewers, what that is and how it shows up in the workplace.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's the least talked about ism. We talk a lot about gender diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, the LGBTQ community, but we don't talk about ageism. It's actually very accepted. We make a lot of offhanded jokes. I make them about myself. And I come from the tech space where the industry skews very young. In one of the last organizations that I worked for, people 50 and above made up less than 2% of the entire 3,500 person company. So you feel like you really don't belong. And there is, when you look at the ERG groups inside of organizations, there's usually not one for that 40 and above demographic. And there's not a lot of focus played on that, but it is very real. It came to me because I was on TikTok and I saw a lot of content around how to hide your age on your resume. Not to come across as too experienced. So shave
Yeah.
off 10 years. Don't put your graduation date on. And I understand in the context of our society why that's important for people who simply need to land a job.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's time that we start challenging those beliefs that as people are living longer, we continue to have so much to contribute to an organization, and organizations that have a wide diversity of generations, of ages, are going to have more diversity of thought and experience. And it's time for us to really start valuing the experience that comes with age.
Yeah, I do think that's such a great point, that we tend to think of implicit bias as this nefarious thing that exists in the ether, and oftentimes fail to connect it to the practical side of it happens and it shows up, and we don't realize how we conform to people's implicit biases. That's why we do resume redaction, or we change our resume to make it seem like maybe we're less than, or we don't have as much experience, or we leave our last name off if it's a Black last name, and we never really address the actual bias. And I feel like this is what you're getting at, right? Which is the bias is really the recruiter, the person who's actually hiring that person, or the hiring manager who's making those decisions. And that's who should really have the onus for this, right? You should be able to show up with all your plethora of experience, whether it be age, or with your last name, if it happens to be Black, or your first name, right? And not have those things counted against you. So I love that thought. I think it's so important for our listeners to take away.
Yeah. And I think with age, again, I do feel there's a lot of conversation around other demographics, other sort of protected or marginalized communities, which is great. And the problem's not solved by any means, but we don't talk about that as much when it comes to age. And we do all kinds of things to hide our age in our day-to-day lives outside of the workplace. We get Botox, we get our hair color, and, we do things because we are afraid of what it means to be older. We have a lot of negative stereotypes and biases about older or more mature workers. They don't know technology. They don't have the energy to keep up with the fast pace of work. They're, stuck in their ways and not particularly innovative. And those are all stereotypes. And I really would like to see workplaces start to challenge those beliefs.
Yeah, Rachel. And I wonder if you've seen this. I've heard this from several consultants that work, friend of consultants that work in this space, especially around age. Excuse me. Which is that you also see a big difference when we talk about kind of age discrimination between women and males. Like there's a big difference in gap. Talk to that. Like, what is that about? What's going on there?
I don't have the answer to that, but look, all you got to do is look at George Clooney, right? I mean, what is he? He's in his 60s maybe, and he's still considered attractive and viable and successful. And you juxtapose that against an older actress, and they're past their prime, and they're grumpy and old and wrinkly. So we just have this, and I think that it is true for women, and I think it is the intersectionality, right, of being a woman and being someone who's older. Now you have two strikes against you.
Yeah, I think that's such a good analogy with acting and just kind of that in Hollywood in general, because I think it's something that's visible that everyone can see. And when you think of Hollywood, even think about the roles that actors are cast in or have opportunity to play as they get older. For men, it really doesn't narrow the field. Like they can still play the love interest, they can still play the action star, they can still play kind of all the roles that were really available to them when they were younger. But to women, now it's like you get to play the grandmotherly role. That's the role that's available for you, and they never get to play the love interest or any of these other that were available when they're younger and are still available to their counterparts.
Yeah, and it was actually a big media interest in that when the new Top Gun movie came out, and I don't remember the actress's name, Kelly Willis maybe, I don't know, and Tom Cruise, and of course Tom Cruise looks great, but there was a lot of misogyny around what it is to look like a 50-year-old woman.